The studio lights burned hot, brighter than they looked on television. A silence lingered for half a second, the kind of silence that clings before a storm. And then, Kellyanne Conway's voice ripped through the air. It wasn't debate. It wasn't dialogue. It was fury, sharpened and unleashed for millions to witness. She leaned forward, words tangled with rage, shouting over the host, over the panel, over reason itself. The volume spiked. Her face tightened. The audience at home froze, and in that moment it was no longer a discussion. It was a spectacle. America had seen her spin. America had seen her twist. But this was something else entirely. A scream live on national television, echoing like a warning siren. The control room panicked. Cameras scrambled to cut away, but the damage was done. Millions had already seen it. Screenshots racing across Twitter before the segment even ended. Kellyanne lost it, one user posted. She's unraveling. Another, is this politics or is this reality TV? The nation wasn't just watching. It was reacting in real time, outrage and disbelief spreading like wildfire. But in the studio itself there was something far more powerful than Kellyanne's scream. It was the silence of Jasmine Crockett. Sitting just feet away, she didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She let the storm pass, eyes steady, posture calm. Viewers could see it, the kind of composure that makes noise look small. The moment became theater. One figure collapsing into chaos, another embodying restraint. And in that split-screen contrast, a story larger than two women began to emerge. This wasn't just Conway versus Crockett. This was the arrogance of entitlement against the quiet force of dignity. Still, the scream was only the spark. The true explosion had yet to come. Because as the shouting peaked and the rage crescendoed, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, ready to speak. The host glanced nervously at the clock. The nation leaned in, earbuds in, TV volumes raised, feeds refreshing every second. Everyone thought they had just witnessed the climax. They were wrong, because it wasn't the scream that stunned the nation. It was the reply that followed, and that reply would change everything. Politics has always thrived on spectacle, but rarely does it offer such a crystal-clear collision of characters. On one side, Kellyanne Conway, long branded the master of spin. For years, she perfected the art of dodging, weaving, and manipulating every interview into theater. She wasn't just a Trump world advisor. She was its sharp-tongued defender, its loyal attack dog, the woman who could take a simple question and turn it into a labyrinth of half-truths and rhetorical traps. To her supporters, she was clever, quick, untouchable. To her critics, she was chaos personified, but the chaos had consequences. Conway's style, interruptions, shouting matches, relentless deflections, was designed to overwhelm, not persuade. It worked in the Trump years, when the shock factor itself became the message. Yet here she was again, years later, falling back on the same playbook. Only this time, something felt different, because across from her sat someone who didn't play by the same rules. Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas had built a reputation not through noise, but through clarity. In committee hearings, she dismantled opponents with a calm edge that stung deeper than any shout. She didn't flail or scramble. She stayed still, forcing the truth to do the work. To many, Crockett represented a new wave of leadership, unapologetic about identity, unafraid of confrontation, but rooted in poise rather than volume. The stakes in that studio were bigger than one TV clash. This was a cultural moment. Conway's old guard politics of distortion, meeting Crockett's new guard insistence on dignity. It wasn't just about two women on opposite ends of the screen. It was about two Americas facing each other in real time. For the audience watching, the contrast was electrifying. Conway's anger was familiar. America had seen it dominate headlines for years. But Crockett's stillness carried weight. She wasn't just sitting there. She was holding the space, embodying a kind of resistance that didn't need to raise its voice. Social media felt it instantly. Even before Crockett opened her mouth, viewers tweeted, "She's not even talking yet. And she's already winning." Others wrote, "Kellyanne's spin doesn't work when someone refuses to dance with her." The anticipation built like pressure in a sealed room. This was no longer just a panel. It was a test of what America valued. Would chaos still dominate? Or was the nation ready to reward composure, reason, and dignity? And the irony was thick. Conway, once praised for controlling every narrative, was now losing control of her own. Each scream chipped away at her image, exposing the fragility beneath the fury. Crockett, by contrast, seemed to grow taller in silence, a presence that needed no theatrics. The cameras captured it all: Conway's flushed face, Crockett's calm eyes, the host's uneasy glances. Every second was theatre, and every second mattered, because this wasn't just a debate about policy or politics. It was about how power is performed and who the audience ultimately believes. The tension could be felt across living rooms, across phones glowing in the night. Everyone watching sensed it. The moment was about to tip, and when the cameras rolled, no one could have predicted what would unfold. To understand the explosion on live television, you have to rewind. Kellyanne Conway did not arrive in that studio as an unknown voice. She arrived carrying years of notoriety, a brand forged in firestorms. For the better part of the Trump era, she was the face of the spin room. When others crumbled under tough questioning, Conway thrived. She wasn't intimidated by confrontation. She invited it. To watch her in her prime was to see a woman who could bulldoze an entire conversation by sheer force of will. She became famous for her contradictions. Alternative facts, she once called them, a phrase that immediately entered the political lexicon as shorthand for shameless distortion. Where others would blush or backtrack after a misstep, Conway doubled down, flashing a wry smile as if daring the world to catch her. It was theatre, pure and simple, and she knew it. Late-night shows mocked her. Journalists groaned when they saw her name on the booking sheet. But producers kept calling her back because she delivered what television craves: drama. She had perfected the art of turning every exchange into combat, every question into a battlefield. With rapid-fire interruptions and a dismissive laugh, she left opponents sputtering, their points drowned out by her flood of words. There was arrogance in it, yes, but it was arrogance as strategy. Conway's entire persona was built on the idea that dominance meant victory. Speak louder, speak faster. Leave no space for rebuttal. It didn't matter if the logic crumbled under scrutiny. What mattered was that her voice, her face, her energy became the lasting impression. In that sense, she was more performer than pundit. She thrived on spectacle, knowing the viral clip was more valuable than the full exchange. Viewers might not remember the policy detail, but they would remember the smirk, the eye roll, the biting one-liner. She was in every sense a chaos agent, someone who didn't need to win arguments so long as she kept her opponents off balance. But chaos has a shelf life. Over time, what once felt like cleverness began to look like desperation. What once looked sharp began to look shrill, and what once commanded attention began to wear thin. The very tools that built her reputation became the same tools that chipped away at it. Her critics noted the pattern. When challenged by facts, Conway pivoted. When pressed too hard, she interrupted, and when cornered, she raised her voice. It was a tactic she believed could never fail, until she met opponents who refused to play the game. On that fateful day, sitting across from Jasmine Crockett, the old Conway strategy returned in full force. She leaned on the same arsenal: mockery, dismissal, volume. But the nation watching was no longer dazzled by the performance. They had seen it before too many times, and the shine was gone. Conway was still fighting as though it were 2016, believing that sheer dominance could carry her through. What she didn't see, what millions watching did see, was that dominance without substance only deepened the cracks in her armor. Every scream that escaped her lips seemed less like control and more like loss of it. The villain energy was palpable. She cut off the host, waved her hands with impatience, rolled her eyes as if truth itself were beneath her. It was the arrogance of someone who believed the rules never applied, that every stage was hers to command. And for years that arrogance worked. But history is cruel to arrogance, because arrogance always carries within it the seed of downfall.
The louder the scream, the harder the silence afterward. And Kellyanne Conway was about to learn just how heavy that silence could be. To understand why Jasmine Crockett's reply hit like thunder after Conway's scream, you have to know where she came from. Her story does not begin in a television studio, nor in the halls of Congress, but in the heart of Texas. Growing up, she was surrounded by both the weight of history and the promise of possibility. She saw firsthand the struggles of working-class families, the quiet resilience of communities that had to fight twice as hard to be heard, and the way dignity became a shield when opportunity was scarce. Those roots mattered. They shaped her voice, her fire, and her refusal to bend when the storm pressed down. Before she ever stepped into politics, Crockett was a lawyer, not a celebrity lawyer chasing cameras, but a relentless advocate for people who had no one else. She fought for justice in courtrooms where the odds were stacked, where defendants walked in already judged by the color of their skin, by their bank accounts, by their zip codes. For Crockett, the law was not an abstract exercise. It was a battlefield where lives were decided, and in that arena she built her reputation not with theatrics, but with precision. Her questions cut sharp, her arguments landed heavy. She was steady when others cracked under pressure. That discipline carried into Congress. When elected, Crockett did not arrive quietly. She arrived ready. In committee hearings, she confronted bad faith arguments with an unshakable calm. Where others shouted, she measured her words. Where others grew flustered, she locked in. Viewers saw it, her ability to sit through waves of disrespect, dismissive tones, and outright hostility without losing her composure. That composure became her weapon. Her critics tried to label her as inexperienced or out of her depth, but every time they pressed, she pushed back, not with rage, but with clarity. Her colleagues learned quickly. Crockett thrived under fire. The more she was tested, the sharper she became. The more chaos erupted around her, the more still she seemed to stand. She had a way of flipping the script. Moments designed to rattle her instead exposed the fragility of those who attacked. That was not coincidence. It was preparation. Her years as an attorney had trained her to expect the ambush, to anticipate the trap, and to dismantle it before it closed. And so, when Jasmine Crockett sat across from Kellyanne Conway in that television studio, she wasn't just another panelist. She was a woman forged in the crucible of combat, not the loud combat of sound bites and viral meltdowns, but the quiet combat of injustice met head-on. She knew what it meant to be underestimated. She knew what it meant to be interrupted. She knew what it meant to have to defend herself, her people, her truth. And she knew how to do it without losing her balance. In that moment, as Conway screamed and gestured wildly, Crockett's stillness was not inaction. It was power. It was the same power she had carried into every courtroom, every hearing, every hostile exchange. She didn't need to fight for attention. Her presence demanded it. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth did that for her. Her supporters recognized it instantly. This wasn't the kind of calm that comes from detachment. This was the kind of calm that comes from conviction. A calm born of battles fought in silence, in overlooked corners of the system, in fights most people never see but that change lives. Crockett had trained herself, whether consciously or not, for precisely this kind of ambush. And that's why the moment mattered. For Conway, the studio was just another performance, another round of chaos's strategy. For Crockett, it was something deeper. It was a chance to show the country what composure looked like when arrogance tried to bulldoze it. It was a chance to flip the script in front of millions. It was the moment she had been unknowingly preparing for her entire career. The lights, the cameras, the scream, all of it was fuel. Crockett didn't just survive the storm, she absorbed it. And when the storm broke, she was still standing, calm as ever, ready to speak. Because this wasn't just another TV panel. This was her proving ground. And America was about to see what happened when a calm warrior finally chose to strike. The cameras tightened on the table. The host asked a question, measured, professional, the kind of query that should have led to a thoughtful exchange. But Kellyanne Conway had no interest in exchange. Before the sentence was finished, she lunged forward with her words, slicing through the host's voice like a blade. Her tone was sharp, her pitch climbing. She cut off the first attempt at balance, then the second. By the third, she was in full stride, hands waving, eyebrows arched, the performance all too familiar. Conway wasn't answering the question. She was controlling the air. Every pause, every space that might have allowed a reply, she filled with more sound. Her voice rose louder, the rhythm quickened, each sentence crashing over the last until the conversation drowned in noise. Jasmine Crockett sat back, eyes locked, still as stone. She didn't flinch at the interruptions. She didn't break at the dismissive smirks. Where Conway gestured wildly, Crockett's hands remained folded, a quiet defiance. The cameras captured the split screen. On the left, chaos. On the right, composure. The tension was no longer political. It was gladiatorial. The studio felt like an arena. Conway jabbed with accusations, thrust with mockery, throwing every punch she had. She rolled her eyes with every mention of Crockett's name, dismissed her words before they were even spoken. The insults landed one after another, each meant to rattle, to provoke, to drag Crockett into the same mud. But Crockett refused to swing wild. It was like watching two boxers in opposite styles, one throwing flurries, arms flying, hoping that sheer volume would land a blow, the other standing calm, gloves tight, waiting for the right moment, conserving energy, letting the storm expend itself. Viewers at home could see it, the imbalance, the desperation in Conway's pace. Her voice cracked as she leaned harder on volume, harder on arrogance, harder on the only strategy she had ever known. The host tried to intervene, tried to restore order, but Conway barreled over him too. It wasn't about dialogue anymore. It was about dominance. She pounded the table with words, her voice now high-pitched, breathless, each insult more frantic than the last. And still, Crockett did not bite. That restraint was its own counterpunch. For every shout, Crockett's silence grew louder. For every interruption, her stillness became more striking. Audiences tweeted in real time, "She's not even talking and she's already winning." Another post read, "Conway looks unhinged. Crockett looks like the adult in the room." The energy shifted. Conway thought she was pressing her advantage, but the optics betrayed her. Her face reddened under the studio lights, her gestures widened into something theatrical, almost desperate. Meanwhile, Crockett's calm became magnetic, pulling the nation's focus without her saying a single word. And then came the breaking point. Conway, voice cracking from the strain, jabbed with one last insult, louder, more personal, more venomous than the rest. The studio seemed to freeze in the echo of her words. For a moment, it felt as if the noise itself might swallow the set whole. The audience watching held its breath. The storm had spent itself. The chaos had peaked. And then, as Conway pushed the chaos to its breaking point, Jasmine finally moved. The storm had raged long enough. Kellyanne Conway's voice still echoed, sharp and jagged, her final insult hanging heavy in the air. For a heartbeat, the studio was suspended in chaos, camera lights buzzing, the host fumbling for control, the audience at home bracing for more. And then, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match the volume. Her first words came soft, deliberate, each syllable carrying more weight than Conway's barrage of noise. "Are you finished?" Crockett asked, her tone measured, her eyes steady. The question wasn't loud, but it landed like a bell tolling in a cathedral. The studio fell silent. When the shouting ended and the viral storm began to settle, what lingered wasn't just a clever line or a sharp exchange. It was a feeling, a recognition that Jasmine Crockett's calm had revealed something larger than the clash itself. For years, arrogance had been rewarded with airtime. Chaos had been confused with strength. But in those few minutes, Crockett reframed the rules. Her reply wasn't simply a counterpunch to Kellyanne Conway's scream. It was a reminder that dignity can dismantle arrogance more effectively than rage ever could. By refusing to be dragged into the mud, Crockett made Conway's performance look small, almost pitiful. It was as if the scream had only existed to set up the truth that followed. "You don't have to scream to be heard," Crockett said in her final remarks that evening. "You have to stand firm." That sentence became more than a clap back. It became a credo. Social media users printed it on graphics, stitched it into videos, shared it like scripture. The words resonated because they spoke to something many Americans had long felt: that the loudest voice isn't always the strongest, and that clarity, calm, and conviction are not weaknesses. They're the very foundation of leadership. This is where Crockett's moment transcended politics. It touched on identity, dignity, and the way democracy itself survives. In a nation defined by shouting matches on cable news, by social media built on outrage algorithms, her composure felt revolutionary.